Imagine being a princess of the Ember pack, rejected by your own father for being an Omega without a wolf. You flee and find love with Alpha Carus, but he betrays and banishes you when you can't conceive. Hitting rock bottom awakens your powerful, dormant wolf within. You return to your home pack stronger than ever, seeking revenge. At your homecoming celebration, your ex-husband Carus is shocked to see the woman he discarded transformed into a fierce leader. Filled with regret, he wants to make amends and win you back, but you're now stone-hearted and ready to serve him a taste of his own medicine. Dearest listener, listen to the story of Ava.
Ava's POV. She doesn't have it still? I could hear my father's voice as he spoke in the background. The tone was a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. A mixture that never bodes well when you are the daughter of an alpha. You will lower your voice. She might hear you. My mother said in a bid to calm my father. Let her hear everything I have to say about her. She should know she is a disappointment to my mileage. I leaned back to the wall, feeling my hand tightened as I fought back the urge to drop to the ground and burst into tears. She is nothing but an Omega. How could I give birth to one like her? His voice rang out from the room. I am the Alpha of Ember Pack, and no child of mine can be an Omega. She is the only one you have. My mother's voice came on. I know it is disappointing she hasn't seen her wolf, but we have to be patient. I've been patient. Why don't you come bear me another heir instead of waiting for one who is stuck in her Omega status? Father said with a mocking tone. I picked myself from the wall. My steps led me away from the room. I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going to as I stepped out into the night. The wind blew my hair, whip lashing it against my face. The stinging pain felt like a solace to the pain from my heartache. Everywhere seemed quiet, except for the patrol of guards stationed around the place. I raised my head to stare at the overhanging ball of the moon. They don't want me here. Why am I staying here? I asked no one in particular as I turned back to the house, staring at my father's room. They never cared about me. Why would they care that I never existed? It would be the best thing that had happened to them. You thought as I picked my gown in my hand, walking until I was away from the house. Nowhere in mind, just the thought of leaving. The trail led on and on. The night grew bleak with every house shutting off their candle light and tucking in for the night. My eyes burned red with tears that threatened to fall. No one has to see me cry. I muttered to myself as my legs picked speed. What started as a slow pitter-patter against the floor increased in pace until I was running to a destination I had not known. Forest green and tree foliage slapped against my face as the tears flowed freely when I stopped. My throat, parched from running. My legs had no strength to run further and the only thing I felt was the dizziness in my head. I crawled to the sound of lapping water, sitting next to it to cool myself, never realizing as I fell into slumber. The neighbor of horses brought me back to life as I held my hand over my face to stop the rays of sun from piercing through. Who is she? A male voice echoed over the chirping of birds. A spy? The words pulled me out of my drowsiness as I stared into the faces of men and women. The insignia they bore on their faces was different, but what stood apart was the man at the helm of the group as he came down from his horse. She doesn't look like a spy, or anything dangerous. The man said, walking towards me. His dark eyes gleamed in the morning sun. His poise held its aura as he stood in front of me, lowering his gaze to stare. Don't get too close, Alpha Carus. Here, I knew the name of the man who stood in front of me with a smile. Are you lost? Carus asked, stretching his hand in front of me. I looked around, staring at the eyes that stared back at me. Each one of them held a stare that meant my death if I moved in the wrong way. I gulped, nodding my head slowly. I told you she wasn't dangerous. Carus said as he helped me to my feet. She's just a little lost. He turned to me. His eyes were roaming around me. Are you from around here? I shook my head at his question. I'm from anywhere they want me. She's a runaway. Whispers spread from the group. A runaway. Carus said with a hum. Would you want to be a part of my pack? I did not need to think twice as I nodded my head. She rides with me, Carus said, pulling me to his horse. A few men came to his side, helping me and him to mount his horse. I knew the men weren't happy about it with their mumbling, but Carus had his hand around me, leading them on. Welcome to Shadowgate, Carus said with his arms wide open as the horse prodded on past tall bushes and through streets. I watched, staring at the houses as I had never left my pack. The people outside dropped to a curt bow. They seemed to love their alpha, and it was the best thing I could ever notice. Maybe I had found a new forever home away from people who never wanted me. A few weeks had passed since Carus had brought me to his pack. He made me feel like a queen, putting guards and a maid at my beck and call. A knock sounded on my door one evening as I sat in my room, enjoying the feeling of being wanted. "Come in," I said with my gaze fixated on the door. Carus stuck his head through a slit before walking in. "Thought you would be prepping for bed now." I shook my head as I rose from the chair, watching as he walked closer to me. "No. I was thinking about a few things. And I've been thinking about some things on my part as well," Carus said as he stood in front of me. His presence was an overbearing pressure that took over the space in the room. Did I love him? I asked myself as I stared into his dark eyes. Carus smiled at me as he held my cheek. His hands caressed them with what I thought was a spark of love. "You can tell me what you have in mind, Alpha Carus. Let's start with what you have been thinking, Ava," Carus said with a gaze that seemed to rip all my guard. I gulped. "The peace I received here. I don't want to lose it for anything." Carus smiled, his hands running through his hair. "And what if I told you there was a way you were never going to lose that peace ever again?" "Hey?" I did not know when the words left my lips. "What do you mean?" Carus took my hand in his hand, pulling it to his face. "Look into my eyes." I did, staring into those inky black eyes of his, pulling and drawing me into an endless abyss. "What do you see?" "You." I gulped as I felt my body tense at the thought of what was about to happen. Carus smiled as he pushed me to the bed. His toned body overshadowed me, keeping me pinned to the bed while he slipped his clothes off his head. "What if I asked that you be my Luna?" My body froze at his words. My mind was a haze and jumble of thought as my mind tried to process what he had said. "I am an Omega. The worst person you can have as your mate." Carus placed a finger on my lips. "I'm the one who decides who will become my mate, and my choice is as obvious as daylight. You are my mate." No words left my lips as his lips came crashing onto mine, sucking the air from my lungs. I gasped as he pulled away, watching him savor the taste of my lips. I felt my body tremble as never before. His hands touched my skin, reaching for my clothes and exposing my body to the forces of the open air. "Will you be mine?" Carus asked as he placed a kiss on my breasts. I moaned, biting down on my lower lips. His offer was one no one would refuse. "I want to be yours," I said, whispering as my fingers dug into his back. "Then be mine." I had no answer as his lips wrapped in mine. His loins filled my inside with my back arching and my legs spreading to accept him. His body joined with mine, filling my insides with a pleasure I've never felt before. His lips on my neck sent explosions of pleasure rocking through my system until everything faded into the darkness of pleasure and ecstasy. I was his, and he was mine. The years passed with my stay in Shadowgate as Luna, yet something was missing. I could tell it in the looks in Carus' eyes at the dining or whenever we met. I hear it in the silence, just as I had heard my father talk of my inability to transform. When would the Luna bear you an heir? The questions and the rumors borne through the castle and through the ears of all that could hear. Even Carus asked me these questions at times, and yet I could not give the answer. I would spend days in my room, bawling my eyes out. I could not transform into a wolf, nor could conceive a child. There is something wrong with me, I said to myself. Always something lacking, and even now I could not give the man I loved a child. More days passed, and I was yet to receive the worst as I stepped into Carus' room. Carus laid on the bed with another woman. They remained tangled, unaware of my presence as tears filled my eyes. "Carus," I blurted, leaning in the doorframe. Carus turned to me, pulling the sheets over his body. "Leave." A word more powerful than anything he had to say. He asked me to leave his presence while he made love to another woman. I turned away, not wanting to break myself anymore by standing close to him. He came out with his new mistress, wrapping his robe around him as the woman cat walked out of the mansion. "Why?" I asked as he sat today. Carus held his hand up. "You ask why when you've not given me an heir even now, and you expect me to keep on waiting? You said you loved me." Carus clicked his tongue, pushing himself from his seat. "Talking to you is a waste of time. You can continue your sulking or you can find a way to give me an heir. If you don't, other will do so," he replied, walking away from me. The next weeks were only filled with whispers. No one hid themselves as they talked about me and the new mistress Carus had brought home. Today wasn't different as I poured wine into a glass for Carus. There was no reason for me not to perform my wifely duties, despite the words spreading through the castle. "Treason!" someone screamed. I stopped with a glass of wine in my hand, standing with a bewildered look as guards surrounded the dining. What is the matter, and what is the call for treason? Carus asked in his royal glory. His eyes roamed the place as his mistresses stepped forward with a poise in her gait, pointing at me. The Luna. I held my hand to my chest, shocked at the accusation with every pair of eyes burning in my direction. Why would you want to accuse me of a crime I never even committed? You have committed it yet, but you are, the lady said, pointing to me. Carus had a scowl on his face. What's the meaning of this, Ava? The mistress came, snatching the glass of wine off my hand. See, she exclaimed as she poured the drink over a plant. I stood, unsure of what was going to happen until it happened. Carus flinched in his chair while I gazed in horror as the plant dried up in its shell. Wolfhound! Carus shouted, turning to stare at me. You would think to poison me. I stuttered, surprised at how it had happened. I told you she was committing treason, the mistress said with a smile on her face. Seize her. Carus ordered, growling to the guards as they spurred me, holding into my arms. This is not true. I would never try to kill you, I said, pleading as the guards held me up to meet Carus' gaze. Carus walked up in front of me with his nose flaring. The only reason I am letting you live is because of the love I once had for you. He turned away, stopping some distance away. Throw her away. I do not want to see her face. It happened like a dream as they dragged me away from the castle with only the clothes I had on my back. I had no say in what would happen next until I was standing in the cold with the guards pointing the way to the forest for me. I stood, ashamed and in the cold, while the guards snickered, laughing at me as they made their way back to the pack. I was alone as before, standing in a forest just as I had begun when I ran away. I turned, walking into the dense forest with my hands wrapped around my body. My feet were heavy, but my heart was heavier, but there was nothing I could do. How would I survive? It was a question I could not answer as I continued my hike into the forest. Balls of snow fell from the sky after days of walking. My stomach rumbled and my eyes drooped. I had no strength left in my body, but I had to push on as I noticed smoke coming from a distance. I was a few steps away when my body dropped to the ground, exhausted and tired. There was no strength left in me to continue. Help her up. I could hear their voices echoing in my head. My body laid weightless on the ground with something warm slipping over me. The darkness came, clasping its hand around my body until all I felt was nothing. The next days since I came were filled with frivolities and lackadaisical whims. The crowd walked around without a leader. I sighed after noting the difference. I was no different from them. An omega as most of all of them, with few being beaters. I muttered to myself. The rations are running low, Miller said as he stood in front of the crowd. Miller was of beta descent, but he could only administer leadership and hope everyone would follow. What do we do? Another beta said. Carter with his lush brown hair and eyes that were evasive. We are hungry, someone said from the crowd. I could see it in their eyes. But what could I do? A lowly omega who had run from her father's home. Was cheated on by the one who she thought loved her. Accused of crimes she never committed, yet she stood in the middle of men and women who were losing everything they could ever dream of. We'll rob from the neighboring small packs, a man said from the crowd. His burly body showed no sign of the famine ravaging the people in front of me. No, I said, stepping out from the crowd. These people are just like us. Plagued by the wars they are inflicting on themselves for the need of control and power. Do you mean we die of hunger and starvation? Someone asked from the crowd with all of them muttering. I fell silent, watching as the crowd turned their attention to me. Even Miller was staring at me for a while before taking control of the situation. I'm afraid we have to raid one of the packs if we need food to survive, Miller said as he walked towards me. And you would be with us. Why? To act as our conscience so we don't do stupid things while raiding, Miller answered as he turned to face the crowd. We will move in tonight. A hit and run. If you fall, you are on your own. Carter as much as you can and run as quick as you can. I turned away from them, wrapping my hand around my chest. I was barely a part of them after they had found me lying at death's door. Miller walked up to me after they had finished their preparation. I liked what you did back there. Standing up against a bunch of hungry people? I was lucky they hadn't torn me apart, I said as I pointed a thumb behind me. Miller turned to look at the group. You cannot blame them. All of us were displaced from our homes. Wars, rogues, and every walk of life just trying to survive. I sighed as I picked twigs from the ground, drawing on the moist soil. It's good to have someone who still has their head on the ground. Helps us know when we are too far across bounds. Miller said as he stood. Prepare. We are moving in tonight. No time for spies or someone ratting us. I nodded, listening as he walked away. I have been many things in my brief life. The heir of an alpha, wife of an alpha, and now I was a rogue. There was nothing I could do but do as Miller suggested. Night fell, and we were out into the woods, walking towards the near pack. Twigs snapped, but it seemed our target never noticed as we moved through barns, pilfering as much good as we could until it happened. Intruders! A whistle echoed, and I stood frozen with fear, not knowing what I could do as people appeared from around the place. It's a trap! Miller screamed, with everyone trying to break out. Gather around my voice. Cries of horror filled the air as we pulled together, hoping to hold our rank. I turned towards the sound of Miller's voice, pulling every strength I could manage when I felt something smack me in the back of head, dropping me to the ground. I got one of them. Round the other ones as soon as you can. A man said as he walked over me, grabbing by the collar. You think this was going to be easy? He asked, slamming me on the ground with so much force that I could hardly breathe. He moved closer with his knuckles ramming into my body while others cheered with pitchforks and daggers in hands while I watched as they rounded the rest of them. It happened in the blink of an eye. My blood burned with a hunger I had never experienced. My sight, blooded with pain, but I did not feel the attack continue. The sound of knuckles crackled into the night air and my vision blurred into clarity. The men stood, holding their pitchforks and daggers away from me. Their eyes held fear I only saw when my father threatened people. What is the matter? The voice did not come as I wanted. Instead, snarls and growl drooled from my lips while the people who I had come within a raid stood with shock on their faces. She's an alpha. Voices rose from the people. They dropped to their knees, laying down their weapons. Another wolf came into view with lips dripping with blood. Its eyes held a mixture of fear and anger, and I could tell from the way it kept its poise. I still did not know what was happening as the wolf lunged at me. My body moved of its own accord, dodging the attack with my mouth going for the neck. My lips closed shut over the neck of this wolf, pinning it down in place even as it thrashed over the place. The sound of dying yelps could not make me release it, even as it thrashed to stillness. My racing heart and the taste of blood in my heart kept my mouth still over it until the sound of bones crunching echoed through the night sky before I let go. The head rolled to the ground while I felt my body loosen. I stood, painting with blood dripping from my mouth, and the head and decapitated body of a wolf laying next to me. Hail, the Luna! Miller said as he draped a blanket over my shoulders, dropping to a knee. All hail the Luna! I sat on my throne as a messenger rushed in with a letter in his hand. You have a message. Miller took the letter from his hand, bringing it to me. The designs are very intricate. I hummed as you took the letter into my hands. My eyes widened at the sight of the design. It was familiar with the wolf and the sparks of flames hanging above the wolf's head. I pulled the letter open with a curious mind. A smile crossed my lips as I read the details entailed in the piece of paper I held. What is it, Luna? Miller asked, pushing closer to me. I raised my head to stare at my beater. Have you been to Ember Pack? His eyes widened. One of the biggest packs? I nodded as I pulled away from my throne. Nobody knows of my lineage from this place, but I know there's been rumors. You are from Ember? You can say I am my father's only heir. And the letter was from your father? I raised my hand, holding the letter to my eyes. A homecoming for the child he never wanted. What do they say about power? I will prepare for our departure tomorrow. I nodded at Miller as I stared at the letter. My father didn't seem to hide his thoughts, coming straight for me instead of holding himself accountable, but I had my reason as I stared at the burning flame beside me. You want a homecoming? Father? I will give you a homecoming. Morning came sooner than I had expected. I stretched out of bed, cleaning myself in preparation for the day. A knock sounded on my door. Miller? I asked as I placed the last of my dressing in place. Yes, Luna, Miller said, as he pushed the door open. I turned, walking towards him. I know the reason you are here. Miller smiled as he pushed out of the way, letting me pass by him. Your bags are ready and a convoy. I hummed at his words, heading towards the door of my mansion. Miller wasn't wrong when he said I had a convoy waiting for me. It was almost like an army, meant to protect me from the perils of the world I was about to step on, but I wanted more. Gather the entire army. Miller stared at me with an eyebrow raised. What do you mean? This would leave the pack open to attack. It's not very deep, Miller. Get them ready to leave for Ember Pack. I said as I catwalked towards my house, mounting it in one full swing while Miller walked away. Get them to me. My mount moved forward, swinging through the men as they parted. Miller joined me with more men. My heel against the side of my mount, and it was sprinting through the woods. It took us 2 days of steady riding to reach Ember Pack. The air of celebration, my father would call it, but I had other thoughts in my mind. Keep the men on standby, I said to Miller as I pushed my horse forward with a few men by my side, slipping into the pack. The air of celebration filled the air, but I knew what I was about to become. No one recognized me as I dismounted my horse, walking into the gathering. A few eyes stared towards me, but that was all there was until someone actually did. It was Carus with his hand dropping from his lips. Carus stood, staring at me as I walked around. He choked on his drink, spilling it to the ground. I smiled as I catwalked towards him. Hi, Carus. It's been ages. Carus smiled. A forced smile that could tell with his gaze at me. Seems you've built something for yourself, Ava. You can say that again. Took a while, but I'm here now, I said as I looked around. Ava. My father called, walking towards me with his arms wide open. My mother followed behind him, the meek Luna she had always been. I stood still with my face held high. A few guards stood in front of him, stopping him from reaching me. You will not allow your father to give you a hug? My father asked as he stopped in his tracks. I chuckled, wiping my thumb against my lower lips. I don't recall that pride on your face when you mocked my inability to become my wolf. He chuckled, dropping his hands to his side. And look at what you turned out to be. The singular most powerful force in the Lycan world. What more could make a father prouder? I looked around, seeing the eyes gazing around. This was what I wanted. For them to watch everything they loved, owned, burn down in flames and blood. We could come back together, Ava. Make it a union no one would want to challenge. Carus said as he walked next to my father. I chuckled out loud, holding my hands open. I conquered the rogues. United the warring packs outside of your jurisdiction. I built my pack out of love and the strength of those who actually loved me, and you think I would come back for a mere homecoming? What are you saying, Ava? My mother asked, joining the men. You want to know what I'm saying? I asked with a smirk on my face. My hands raised up to the sky. A guard raised a horn, blowing it into the sky. The horn blared, resounded into the distance while the people gasped around me. Other sounds echoed from around the pack. They realized it late as I stood with my hand on my waist and my fangs bearing out of my lips. This is time for me to pay back. My smile widened with the look on their face when they realized what I meant.
The end. Did you enjoy the story? Kindly leave your review in the comments and subscribe for more interesting stories. Lots of love.